Hi there and welcome. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do a crepe paper peony. So I have a couple here I'm going to show you, and you're going to see that they look slightly different, and I'm going to talk about why they do as we get into it. But today I'm just going to be doing the basic standard peony that I love to do. It's a really simple flower and I just love how fluffy it is. So I'm going to be using 180 gram crepe paper, which is a very heavy paper, and it is quite stretchy, so it's got a lot of stretch, it's got a lot of movement. So if you've got a roll, just cut out approximately 50 centimeters. That's usually what I cut out. In this one it was about 48. Doesn't matter if you're off a little bit. I find I use all of that paper up to make one flower. Now I'm going to just measure some petals out here for you. The petals I'm going to be using, the large petal is 7 centimeters, the small petal is 6.2 centimeters. Now regarding the width, you're looking at about 1 inch width to a little over of an inch, to a little more than an inch. Really, it depends. If you're using kind of the cheaper crepe paper from, let's say, China, or you're using double-sided crepe paper, you might want to make these a little wider because you are going to have less stretch. So again, it depends on what kind of paper you're using. For this, I'm just going to go with that 1 inch to over 1 inch. So grab your hot glue. Now you don't have to use hot glue. If you have another adhesive you can use it. I like using the hot glue for reasons that it dries quickly and it's a little more stable. You're also going to need some wire for your stem as well. Now I use a fairly thick wire. That's just what I have on hand, and it's just easy to handle. So I'm going to fold my paper here, and that's just so I can cut a lot of it off here at once. And I'm using the small petal, and I'm cutting off paper that's going to be approximately that size, and this is going to be for the center of the flower. Now again, because this paper is heavy and it's got a lot of stretch, I'm gonna stretch this just a little bit. Now you can see that this strip is really uneven. That doesn't bother me as long as it's even on the bottom, because I am going to cut some petals into it. And to cut some petals into it and hold it together while I do that, I grab a binder clip. I find this really handy when doing center of flowers, or if you've got a lot of cutting to do on a long strip of flowers. This just keeps that crepe paper stable and not moving, so you can get good even cuts. So I'm cutting the folds on each side no more than 2 inches, because you want to give yourself a little bit of room down at the bottom so that this doesn't tear apart. Even if it did, you could still use it, but it's just less hassle if it doesn't. So I'm just measuring here to make sure I've got the right length before I go in and cut my petals. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting about 1/2 inch in, and I'll cut about 4 strips here. Again, you don't have to fold it and do it this way, but at the same time you don't want to do this on a full long strip. So that's why I fold it up, and then I can cut all my petals fairly quickly here. Now I'm going to be cutting kind of a rounded point at each end of these, and that's what we'll be using for the center of our flower. Now once you've got all your petals cut there on that strip, grab your wire and create a hook. This will help stabilize that center strip of petals. Now with this strip, what you're going to do now is you're going to cup every second petal one way, flip the strip over, and cup the petals the other way. And you can see there I tore the petal a little bit. Not a big deal. Once we put it together, you're not even going to be able to see it. Now, once we've got these all cupped, we're going to add it to our stem. Now, again, you can use a liquid adhesive if you want to. This is the tacky glue that I use a lot with my crepe paper flowers, and I have used it for this flower, but again, it doesn't dry very quickly, but it does give you a lot less bulk compared to hot glue. But today we're just going to be using some hot glue. So I put some hot glue on that hook there, and I'm just going to put one petal underneath that hook. And then I'm just going to add some hot glue all along that stem area there. And just make sure that this is nice and secure. The last thing you want to happen when you make a crepe paper flower is to have that bud, that entire flower, just kind of pop off the stem. That would be horrifying. And that's actually happened to me on my own flowers, where the entire flower just pops off the stem. It's just terrible. So when I can, I use the hook and I make sure that that crepe paper is really secured onto that wire. So I'm just adding glue. I'm just really loosely gluing these petals to the center. You want to do your best to make it as even as possible at the bottom, because if it's even on the bottom, you're going to have even petals on the top. Again, you don't want it too tight. You just want to loosely glue it on. Now, I wasn't very diligent about making sure that the bottom was very even, so I've got a little excess there that I'm just going to take my scissors and trim off. And this will just help me later when I put on not only my petals, but my greenery as well. So we'll just cut those off. And again, there's not much there, it's just a little bit. And once I do that, I'm going to grab my hot glue and I'm going to hot glue the bottom of all of this paper. And again, this is for stability. This will just make sure nothing moves, nothing comes out of place, because again, you don't want that, especially when you're putting the flower together, because it can happen. So I really like to make sure that everything is secure. So grab your large petal and cut off some more paper, because we're going to make our large petals right now. Again, I have a full strip here. I'm just going to do a little stretch, and then we're going to take our large petal, and this is how I cut my petals, and this is just to get as many petals as possible with less cutting. And I just fold it with that template in there, and I do it about 10 times, so I'm going to have 10 petals here by the time I'm done. I would recommend you have some really good, really sharp scissors if you're going to do this, because again, this paper is really heavy, it's thick, and you want to make sure you've got sharp scissors that can cut through all of that. Mine do a pretty good job, but if you don't have sharp scissors, maybe only do about 5 petals at a time. But we're going to be cutting 30 petals of the large petal and 30 petals of the small petal. So now I'm grabbing about 3 petals. I'm going to cup them. I'm going to stretch them all nice here. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of detail. Just some V's, some cuts straight down, and sometimes I'll round off the edges of those cuts as well, just so they're not so sharp, so it looks a little softer. So here on this one, you can see I just did a straight down cut and just rounded off the edge. And that's all I'm going to do. And again, you can do this 1 petal at a time. You can do this 2 petals at a time. I do it 3 petals at a time. I don't do any more than 3 petals because it's too much, and it could end up where I don't get enough stretch in the petals, or I'm pulling so hard to get that stretch in the petals that I will actually tear one of the petals. So we'll just zoom through this real quick. I'm not going to show you doing all 30 petals. This is just a quick 10 petals here, and this is my last petal. So 30 large petals, here you go. I break them apart so that when I put my petals together, I don't have the same petal at the same time going in a row. And this just allows me to mix those petals up as I put them on the flower. So I end up breaking them apart here. So they're easy to grab and they're all different when I add them. So now we're going to cut our small petals. Same thing, 30 petals, cut off a strip on the same length, and it's really just the same idea. I stretch out my strip a little bit, I fold my template inside, I fold it about 10 times so I can get 10 petals each time. Again, you want sharp scissors, and it's the same idea with the details. Now, cut a V, cut a slit, round off the edges, and do each one differently when you do it. Don't make them the same, make them a little bit different each time. Some of my petals have 2 V's, some of my petals only have a cut straight down the side, rounded off. Sometimes they have a V and a cut. It really depends. Just make them different each time. They don't have to be the same. And if you want them the same, make them the same. That's entirely up to you. Like I said, it'll look great either way. So now we've got all of the large petals here. Again, they go on first, and really simple. Put some hot glue on the bottom, line it up with the bottom of your bud, and attach it. That's it. Now, with each petal, and I'm going to zoom in here, you want to just go slightly over the last petal, not by a lot, like 1 millimeter. That's about it. 2 millimeters if you want to. I wouldn't do too much more than that. And again, that's slightly over at the bottom. Now we'll move on to adhering the small petals. Again, same idea, flush with the bottom of the flower, again, overlapping slightly on the bottom of the petals, and just keep going until all 30 petals are adhered. Now with all your petals attached, this is when you can kind of start to sculpt your flower. So kind of put your finger in there and just start pushing petals down. And this is where you're going to get that fluffy look. And you can see I just keep going around and I pretty much go all the way up into the large petals and just push those petals down. Now, I talked about the different looks you can get with these flowers. You could use a lighter crepe paper that could give you a look. You could use a shorter strip for the center bud, and I'm calling it a bud, but that's probably not what it's called, to get a bit of a different look. You can see here I'm folding down some of the bottom petals to give me a different look. You could leave these up to give you that look. Again, this is a really versatile flower. You can do so much with it. You can make it look like a nice little ball flower, and or you could really fluff it out, which is what I'm doing here. I'm really fluffing it out. I'm bending the petals backwards, giving them a little bit more stretch there on the bottom, and I'll even make a few more cuts in a couple of those bottom ones. So I'm pretty much done playing around with it. I've got the fluffiness I want. This is how I want this flower to look. So now we're going to move on to Some Greenery. I'm pulling out some scrap crepe paper I've got. This is also 180 pound paper, so there again, lots of stretch. It's a heavy paper. And what I'm going to do is I really just kind of wing this. I just cut some 1-inch pieces, kind of almost like in a heart shape, but like a lopsided heart from left to right. And I will add these pieces along with some long leaves on the bottom of my flower. And so we'll just speed through this as well, and I'll throw in some music so you don't have to hear me talk anymore and get this done. Okay, now for the final touch here, we're just going to wrap the stem in some crepe paper. So I find you don't want to cut off too thick of a piece. You don't want to cut off too thin of a piece. So we're going here probably, you could see it here, a few millimeters, not too much. Stretch it out. I will use a liquid glue here as well as my hot glue. My hot glue will adhere the top piece right under the flower, again for stability, just to make sure that this stays on and doesn't come unraveled. Now, I don't really show it on camera here. I'm not sure what I'm doing or what I think I'm doing, but it's hard to see. You really have to see, because what I'm doing is I'm wrapping it around the end pieces of the leaves I added on to the flower. So you can kind of see it here. I started again with the hot glue, and I'm going to pretty much go the rest of the way with liquid glue and then finish it off with hot glue. The hot glue is just too bulky to use on these strips. So this is where I do use the liquid glue here. So you can see I'm just turning and twisting as I hold that strip covered in glue, and it'll adhere. Now, because of the flower I'm making, I need a short stem, so I am not going all the way down on this stem. I'm just going to be going down a little bit, and again I'll finish off with some hot glue and tear the strip off, and then I'm done my flower. So that's it. Here it is. I just love this flower. I love how I can give it different looks. I can make it a fluffy ball, I can make it a ball, or I can even make it a little bit smaller. Now feel free to add more greenery to the stem if you want to, but for this one I just didn't need it. Okay guys, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.